All right, so we're ready, right?
Yes, we're live.
All right, perfect. Hi, everyone. My name is Dominique, and I am the Senior Director of the Center for Policing Equity, Senior Director of Community Engagement at the Center for Policing Equity. Welcome to the town hall that is focusing on young people giving some insight into what is happening with Executive Order 203. So we want to make sure that young people are aware of the recommendations in the report, engage them in dialogue, and clarify any questions that you may have about the community's role in shaping the recommendations in Ithaca and Tompkins County that have been brought forth. And we are going to strive to gather feedback and input during this town hall and provide folks with ways to submit feedback after the town hall has concluded. So I'm going to give a run of show really quickly. I'm looking at my notes, and then we'll jump into introductions and get started. So the run of show will be, we'll do sort of some introductions and welcomes, and then we are going to talk about the origins of the report. Executive Order 203 is what we're referencing, and putting the collaborative together. We're going to be doing some data gathering and themes discussion, and then talk about community input within the process. We'll give a brief overview of key recommendations, and I will flag which ones we want to really focus on and cover. And then we'll talk about what happens next and have a Q&A session. The aim is that we stick to the run of show and keep the points succinct, but we also know that we have some time buffered in case everybody still wants to be able to ask the questions that they want to ask and give the feedback that they want to. And so with that said, I'm going to turn it over popcorn style. Let's see how this goes, to the group to be able to do some quick introductions. And again, we'll jump right in. So I am going to popcorn to Mayor Myrick.
Thank you, Dominique. I'm Savante Myrick, Mayor of the City of Ithaca. It's a pleasure to be here virtually with all of you today. I will go to Jason Molino.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jason Molino. I'm the Tompkins County Administrator. It's good to be here and look forward to talking to everybody. I'm going to pass it to Dr. Gonzalez.
I'm going to start speaking without a muting. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dr. Belisa Gonzalez, and I use she, her pronouns. And I was part of the data collection and analysis group and also the community and communications group. And I'm going to send it over to Travis Brooks.
My name is Travis Brooks, and I was part of the, I don't know what I was part of. I was part of getting folks to focus groups and whatnot. I'm going to pass it to my main man, Richard.
Thank you. You honor me to no end. My name is Richard Rivera. I am a social justice advocate. I work for URO, Ultimate Reentry Program of Tompkins County, and OAR of Tompkins County, which is Opportunities, Alternatives, and Resources. And I was part of the working group on communication and community. We did canvassing the population to get in the narratives of those mostly impacted by policing. And I'll pass it on to the youngest lady of the group, Shelley.
Hi, everyone. I'm Shelley Michelle Nunn. I am the Director of Human Resources for the City of Ithaca, and I worked with the project managers and the community communications group. And yes, I am considered a community elder, proudly. And I will pass it over to, who did I see? Deanna.
Good afternoon. My name is Deanna Carruthers, and I am young at heart, and I'm glad to be here with you this evening. And I'm one of the project managers for the group. And go Jayhawks.
Got popcorn.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, we're not following directions. Marquand.
Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be here. My name is Marquand Frederick, and I'm a freshman from Cornell studying government. While on campus, I am involved in the Cornell Criminal Justice Coalition and the Black Students United organization. And I'm just a student trying to, receive further clarification. I will popcorn into Kyrie.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kyrie Brown. I'm a senior here at Ithaca College. I'm an exercise science major, which kind of doesn't really make sense. I'm trying to be a police officer at the moment, actually. I'm pretty much just that nephew of Travis that does anything he asks me to do. I'll popcorn it to Miss Harmony.
It's about Kyrie. That makes most people on this call, by the way. We go where Travis says go.
Greetings, beautiful people. My name is Miss Harmony Malone.
I think
work
we're
for the
having
Greater
some.
Ithaca Activity Center. I also have my own dance studio and am well known for
We're having some sound issues, I think, Miss Harmony. So give us one
How about
second. Do you want
now?
to
Is
try
that
again?
better?
Yeah.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Miss Harmony Malone. I work for the Greater Ithaca Activity Center. I also have my own dance studio, so I'm known for working with the youth of our community and just being a pretty loud voice in this community. And I'm grateful to be here and honored to be here to talk with you all. Oh, yeah.
All right.
And I'm going to popcorn. To her name is Savannah, but she has Travis Brooks on her name. So Savannah.
Hi everyone. My name is Savannah Gonzalez. Is there something specific I'm supposed to say about myself?
No, not at all. Just why you're here, and just give us a little tea on who you are.
I am 18 years old. I'm a senior at New Roots Charter School. The reason I'm on this call is because I'm really, really devoted to my community and devoted to the people within the community. So I really make it my business to make sure that I can do all that I can to change my community for the better.
Thank you. I think we have one more popcorn person to go. Sean, did you go already or no? I feel like.
No, I didn't, because I've been waiting to call Kyrie Brown out in public for not taking a class with me at Ithaca College, even though he's a senior. So I'll expect to see you on my course roster soon. Dr. Sean Eversley Bradwell, faculty member at Ithaca College, and also a member of the Communication and Community Working Group and the Academic Working Group. And looking forward to having this robust conversation. Thank you all for being here. We'll talk offline, Kyrie. Appreciate you, brother.
All right, I think we got everyone. If we did not, we're missing. Who are we missing? Shelly, you're shaking your head.
You're missing the other Travis Brooks.
Yeah, there's another Travis.
Oh, there's so many. Wait, there are two Travis Brooks. All right, second Travis Brooks.
I don't know if.
Yeah. All right, tag us in when you're ready, because I don't want to hold up folks this time. So let's jump right in. So I want to just talk again. We're here to talk about the recommendations and the Reimagining Public Safety draft report for Ithaca and Tompkins County. The focus of this report is to stop the disproportionate policing of communities of color, and we're really going to focus on how this can benefit those vulnerable communities. We want to make sure that young people who are watching this are aware of the recommendations in this report, and that we are able to clarify any questions you may have about this process. And we want to acknowledge that this is not the entire solution. This is a starting point to a more anti-racist system. We want to stay respectful. We want to have productive and solutions-oriented conversation. And we really want to focus, again, on those recommendations that we are talking about here and how they are impacting the community. So with that, I'm going to pull up my little run of show here. And I want to talk about the overview of the origins and the process. So that's going to put the mayor and county administrator on the spot. We're not going to cover specific recommendations here. We want to just talk specifically about Executive Order 203 and how the collaborative came together. We're going to get deeper into the recommendations. So with that, Mayor Myrick and County Administrator Molino, you're on the clock. Talk to us.
All right, I can I can start a little bit, Mayor. So Executive Order 203 was issued in June, early June, by the governor of New York, and its purpose was for, and its directive was for all communities that have law enforcement agencies to review their policies, their strategies, modernize their policing, and with a focus on ending discrimination and mistreatment of people of color, Black and brown citizens in our community, and marginalized members in our communities. And that was the primary focus of Executive Order 203, and the tenets that we did, that we were to look through and modify our policing strategies around that as a parameter of it. Essentially identifying how we can eliminate inequities in policing. And from that executive order, the mayor and I talked probably in June or July, shortly afterwards, and the mayor said, you know, I know some folks from the Center for Policing Equity. They've done this across the country, wondering if they wanted to partner with us to make this a collaborative effort. And I'll say one more piece, and I'll shift it over to you, Mayor. The primary reason for that is the county. While the county has the deputy sheriffs that have jurisdiction over the whole county, they're the second largest law enforcement agency compared to the city of Ithaca's Ithaca PD, and we felt it was important from a collaborative perspective to see our governments collaborate. We're talking to all the same constituents as we go through this process, and we felt that it was important to do this collectively and collaboratively to show a unified approach to this from a government perspective. So, you know, Mayor, I'll pass it over to you to kind of pick up from there.
Yeah, and of particular relevance, you know, why did we collaborate on this? For the young people who are here with us, you might know that depending on where you live on Cornell's campus, you might be in the city of Ithaca, subject to Ithaca Police Department, or if you cross the street to the townhouses, you're out in the town of Ithaca. The entirety of Ithaca College is in the town of Ithaca, and therefore under the Sheriff's Department, not the Ithaca Police Department. Ithaca High School pulls, of course, from the city of Ithaca, but also the town of Ithaca, which IPD doesn't cover, portions of Caroline, I think even portions of Lansing. So for us to take as comprehensive a view as possible of public safety reform, we felt we had to do it community-wide because these issues just don't stop at lines on the map.
All right, so thank you for that introduction and just some framework setting for Executive Order 203. I now want to turn it over to Dr. Shauna Melissa to talk about data gathering and themes. So we want to really talk a little bit about the focus groups and interview process, and then themes that you saw during that process. And then we're going to turn it a little bit into that community aspect and really talk about that input process. So if you all could give us just sort of that high level piece, and then we'll get into the weeds, but we want to be able to have Q&A time. So don't feel you have to cover everything, but just give us what you got.
Okay, so I'm going to cover the data collection, and Dr. Brad will talk a little bit about themes. So because Executive Order 203 specifically asks that we think about and really target input from minoritized communities, specifically thinking about racial disparities, so communities of color, and those folks, minoritized people in general, don't participate in processes like research or political processes and those sorts of things generally. Well, we had to do what's called oversampling, and which really means that we just went out of our way, and this is where folks like Travis and Richard and folks who are deep in the community, GX, Southside, institutions, both people and physical institutions, really put their names on the line. Shelley, Michelle Nunn, right? To convince folks to participate in this process. And so what we did is we came up with a list of, and this is in conjunction, this is the work of the community and communications working group. We came up with a list of what we call targeted focus groups. So those folks who are not likely to participate in the process of input if we just sort of put out a general call. And we came up with a list, and I'll just quickly go over some of those: returning citizens, veterans, persons living with disabilities, the LGBTQIA community, the Latinx community, immigrant community, college students, community leaders of color, Black women, the Black African American community, Asian and Asian American community, Indigenous community, and houseless community. I don't think I'm forgetting anybody. And some of those groups we had multiple focus groups for. We also had in-person focus groups, although most of them happened via Zoom. But I guess the biggest takeaway is that we went out of our way to really convince folks who are most affected by policing and detriments in policing to participate in this process so that we could hear their feedback. And we had focus groups. And then for those folks who are even harder to track down and get to talk to us, we did individual interviews, and Tammy Baker and Richard Rivera really helped out with those. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Bradwell for the analysis.
Thanks, Dr. Gonzalez. I'll try to keep my comments equally as short. And Dr. Blease and I say that anytime someone says that, that means that you're in for a long time. So I'll try to dispel that myth. Without stealing Richard's thunder, which was extremely powerful last evening, it's important for us to remind ourselves that we're here because of 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And the extreme travesty that took place meant that New York State issued what we call Executive Order 203, which mandates that municipalities review their policing and police departments. And our targeting of specific target groups can be found in a pretty long report, which you can find. The work that Dr. Gonzalez and I did is in Appendix 2. It included focus groups with law enforcement officials. It also included taking a look at community input. So there's much more that's here that came into what we talked about, but I'll really specifically focus on what our targeted focus groups that you heard Dr. Gonzalez say. First, that the vast majority of almost everybody we interviewed and spent time with felt disrespected by police at some point in time in their life, if not dehumanized. And they were very clear about that. Second, which most people said to us very clearly, they didn't trust the process. They'd been down this process before, or they've heard about other processes, either from their parents or their grandparents or uncles or aunties. They didn't want to participate. Why would I do this if it were just not going to go anywhere? And so there was a significant lack of trust that the process would end up someplace in particular. A number of focus groups expressed a preference for handling unlawful situations themselves, not wanting to call the police. We'll handle it internally. Dr. Gonzalez talks about how that has an impact in multiple ways. And if we have time today, we can get into what that means. That there was a lack of de-escalation training, that when police arrive, oftentimes things escalated as opposed to de-escalated. And then I'll just share two more, that folks acknowledged the hard work of law enforcement. So there was this acknowledgement like, look, being a police officer is a tough job, and I want you to do better. And so there's a sort of duality taking place. Like, I understand the work that you're doing is difficult, but you can treat me and recognize my humanity and do something different. And so our targeted focus groups were really clear that they wanted to get rid of forms of oppression, racism, homophobia, classism, that they wanted something different to take place. And we use that information to put together an appendix that folks use for the report, and we'd be more than happy to answer additional questions when the time comes.
All right, thank you both. Dr. Bradwell, every time you talk, I just feel like I have to go on a traveling tour with you, because we've been on a couple of these now, and you're not a spokesperson. But in all fairness, I also do want to talk a little bit about the process of getting these participants and the importance of the process for community input. And so I'm going to ask Richard and Travis if you want to tag team here and talk about that process, and also just about the need to do the oversampling that Dr. Gonzalez talked about. Like, why was that important, and how she talked a little bit about it, but just from your perspective, being on the ground and having to do some of that extra outreach, how did that look, and how did it manifest in sort of some of this community input process?
I'm gonna defer to Richard for that one.
Hello here. All right, so I want to say something before we start. And that is, among the younger population that I talk to, the opinions extreme, like this words like abolition, defund, demilitarize, and there's also hope, and there's also expectation, there's fear, there's a lot of things going on. So there is a bit of racism and the assumption that the Black experience is homogenous. Each of us experience is different, and for you to say anything that all Black people are this and all Black people are that is really racism. And there's a huge amount of stupidity in assuming that the disciplinary practices that disproportionately impact Black people can be reduced to the IPD or the police force itself. It's systemic. It permeates everything, every aspect of our lives. So to reduce it to the police is just a huge amount of stupidity. The reason why we oversample a particular population is because this is about Black people, brown people, indigenous people, yellow people being targeted by police practices, right? White people do not experience it like we do because they have a privilege, and we saw it in a huge stage on June 6th when they went into the Capitol and actually walked out. You know what would have happened to us? That would have been a bunch of Black people or a bunch of brown people or a bunch, you know what I mean? It would have just been a massacre. So we saw it huge there, but we saw it afterwards. And the statements of Ron Johnson saying that he wasn't afraid because it was white people, but had it been Black Lives Matter movement, it would have been a horrible thing for him. So we even saw it spoken. So that's why we're here. We're here because we are trying to fix an aspect of the disciplinary practices that disproportionately impact certain populations, particularly us. So that's why we oversampling. And we believe that this information, and we raise it, what we're doing, we're elevating something that is usually discarded or dismissed by historians, by science, by sociology. We're elevating the narratives of these people to have scholarly input. The records, the rebel archives of poetry, music, graffiti, the stuff that's written on the skate park, defund the police. These are the voices of people that are concerned about an issue and want to speak. And we're elevating that narrative. And that narrative is becoming data. And that data is influencing the recommendations that we had. So that's why we're oversampling, because it is so new and so different to capture these voices. And that's my perspective. Travis?
You said it well. I don't think there's anything to add to that.
So I do want to, first of all, thank you for that. Dr. Gonzalez and Dr. Bradwell, you were the only two people that were doing the research, like the data collection research pieces and the writing pieces, or how did that process play in? Because if you're getting the community input, you're working with Travis and Richard to sort of pull that stuff together. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I do want people to know how involved sort of this process was and iterative and had that community lens to it.
I'll start and then I'll kick it over to Dr. Gonzalez, and Richard and Travis at any point in time reach out, right? We needed folks like Richard and Travis, again, to put their names on the line, to ask folks to participate, to use their community networks, to use personal relationships. When I leaned on folks and asked them to participate, I was met with a great deal of hostility that I understood. Like, again, I'm not participating in this. So we had a number of focus groups that we were trying to work with, and again, and having to encourage folks to participate. We were not the only people that gathered the data, that collected the data. Richard did a number of individual interviews. Travis participated in some of the focus groups, as did Richard. Shelley Michelle Nunn transcribed some of the interviews. Dr. Gonzalez, myself, Laura Branca. I know I'm leaving folks out, so I apologize in advance. What then happened from all of that data is Dr. Gonzalez and I use what we call qualitative research methods to be able to create themes and to be able to get areas of agreement between various focus groups to see what we should focus on. We were a little worried about, sometimes that means majority rules. I hope that makes sense to folks. We did not want that to be the case, but we wanted to make sure, again, that voices were uplifted, particular voices that would historically not participate in a focus group like this. Dr. Gonzalez?
So I guess what I would highlight is that so Dr. Bradwell and myself were the only people who saw all of the information from the focus groups. And that includes the focus groups from law enforcement, although like Sean said before, we did not participate in those focus groups. Those were handled by folks from CPE, but we did analyze them all the same. And so we did that because, and we give such emphasis to the focus group data because they are different from the general input. And this feeds into the reason why we oversampled targeted populations, but also law enforcement. Because if you do these open forums without, that don't have the same standard of data collection, then we can't make the same types of inferences from that input that we can from data that we collected, that we sort of controlled the process. We asked people the same questions. We had trained facilitators, we had scribes. We knew whether or not people participated in more than one focus group, right? Whereas the community input, while extremely important, does not rise to the same standard of research, of data collection. And so we make a distinction between those two different types of input. One we keep at the input level, and the other we rise to the level of data and do what Richard was talking about, which is listen to those voices and look across all of the focus groups and see which themes are coming up over and over again. And so, and those are the themes that you see reflected that Dr. Bradwell talked about. And so they have to meet a certain standard of repetition across focus groups before they can rise to the level of a theme. So while not everything did, there were no shortage, and we reached what we call saturation pretty quickly, meaning that we started hearing the same things over and over again pretty quickly. And so, Dominique, I don't know if there was anything else in the process.
No, that was all. I just wanted to make sure that folks had a picture of who was sort of leading and helping this, because a lot of people think that, you call an outside entity in and they're just doing all the work and it's not community centered. And so I want to do that. What I do also want to do is be able to have space so that people can ask questions. So I know we want to go specifically into covering some of these recommendations, but I want to spend this time thinking about the common misconceptions of sort of some of these recommendations that were put forth, and then having the space to talk about and clarify them outright. So some of the things that had been flagged was that this report may mean increased investment in community, more money for health and human services, mental health, substance abuse. What does unarmed response look like? What is the purpose? What will it do? And they heavily talked a lot about the recommendation number 1, recommendation number 2, and recommendation number 3. So talking about why recommendation 1 is important, why crisis intervention models. I think people have a lot of why questions in their experiences. And so I want to open the floor a little bit earlier so that people can have that time to have Q&A. I know Travis had a particular question that he may have wanted to ask some folks, some young people on the call, but also we have Marquand and Kyrie here. So I want to have you all not be in your nice outfits and just sit here, but let's talk and let's hear what you have to say, and let's open the floor to have young people ask these questions, because we want to hear. So with that, I'm going to be quiet. Marquand and Kyrie, I'm going to turn it over to you. And then what I'll be doing is looking for some questions as well as people start putting those in the chat.
Yeah, thank you so much for allowing this opportunity. I hear that there's from what I've read and what I've seen, I see that there's a lot of collaboration between various groups, various interest groups. I see collaboration from law enforcement, collaboration from criminal justice professionals, collaboration from bureaucracies within the government. And it kind of seems as if everyone's on the same page from what I've read. What do you guys foresee as the biggest challenges to the successful implementation / adoption of this policy?
I would say the courage from members of Common Council to seize the moment and do something that we may never have another chance to do. I know there's a lot of pressure from folks that don't want to see this happen this way. And I think sometimes they're the loudest voices. I think people that want to see the work get done are in the middle and aren't so loud. And, you know, we're just at this moment of time where I think that, you know, council has to dig deep and look inside and do what's right for the folks in this community. And I think the biggest challenge is the pressures to keep things the same. Change is scary for everybody. And I think that we're at this place in time where we can do something amazing and special. And so I think that is one of the biggest challenges.
Just like Marquand said, thank you for the opportunity to be here. But following up with that question, I was going to ask pretty much the same question, like what about the most challenges you guys faced with the policy taking place. I was just going to ask, following up with that question, where do you attack first? You know, with all the groups you're going after, which group do you attack first, and how do you differentiate between the different amount of groups you guys are going after?
Can I jump in real briefly to answer Marquand's question, and then I'll restate Kyrie's question, or I'll repeat it again, Kyrie, so we can get to your question. Marquand, one of the things that's interesting is there isn't a lot of agreement. There are multiple people who have strong feelings that the plan should not go forward. Some who feel that this is a radical revolutionary plan, that it does too much, and some who feel that it's not radical enough, right? And so it's an interesting community of people who are like, nah, you all should vote this down because it doesn't do enough. And so trying to figure that out. So similar to what Travis says, I think for some other folks, it's sort of like we have a moment here to do something. And we realize that there's got to be some progression to be able to seize the moment to move forward. What that looks like moving forward, I think is still up for a lot of discussion, implementation. I'm sure the mayor and the county administrator will agree that there's a lot that still has to be worked out. But it's been interesting to hear two different sides say, I don't agree with this plan for vastly different reasons. The other thing that I'll say that I find to be somewhat racially biased, this is me speaking, not as an administrator, is the number of people who keep talking about crime and how this will somehow have a devastating impact and increase crime without really realizing about how we have to build community. And so I'm struggling between the two of those, if that makes sense, right? That our real goal should be about building community. And I'm less interested in trying to continually punish crime because we know who that impacts the most. And so I just felt compelled to respond to that question. And if I heard, Kyrie, your question again, and please feel free, but I heard you say, what do we attack first, right? What do we address first if we're going to make this work? Is that?
Yep, exactly.
So I want to jump in there. So thank you, Dr. Bradwell. Thank you, Kyrie and Marquand. I want to jump in because I think this ties into sort of some of that recommendation one. And I know that was a big question mark for folks. Can you talk a little bit and answering Kyrie and Marquand's question and sort of pulling in some of what Dr. Bradwell said. Mayor Myrick and County Administrator Molino, can you talk specifically about recommendation one and talk about why it's important to this plan, how it's supported or not, give people a little bit more insight into that, because I know when people immediately read this or they see the press, this is what's been resonating for folks. And I just want to have a space to hold that for folks.
Sure. Yeah, I would be happy to. So recommendation one is the recommendation to create an entirely new department, a Department of Public Safety and Community Solutions. And have that department replace the Ithaca Police Department. Have our officers be ported into the new Department of Public Safety and Community Solutions, as armed public safety workers, and create a second unit of unarmed community solutions workers, all reporting to a civilian director of public safety and community solutions. Where did that recommendation come from? Well, what we heard over 9 months was from the community, as is so eloquently stated by, frankly, everybody who's already spoken, felt dehumanized in their interactions with law enforcement, while still expressing a need, a necessity for a public safety response to some of the challenges that we face living in a 21st century city. And the police officers themselves talked about feeling like they were put in impossible situations daily, asked to respond to things, thousands and thousands of interactions a year that aren't actually, don't require enforcement of any laws, don't require weapons, and yet by showing up in a law enforcement role, tensions are escalated, and by showing up armed, past traumas are triggered, and people become increasingly nervous and defensive. So the solution here was you need a new department that has more functionality, but also will allow us to build a new culture, a culture both inside our own public safety employees, inside our own organization, but also a new culture of respect, communication, transparency, and accountability between that department and between the public. And that's where the civilian director starts to come in. So, and that, Kyrie, to answer your question first, would be where I think we should start, by starting with leadership. If this plan gets approved next week, moving quickly to define that job description, to post it, to do a national search, to bring in the best possible leadership, to move our community forward in this new direction. And I think that leadership will be important because to build off Travis's answer, Marquand, to your question, fear is the number one barrier right now. And there's two kinds of fear. There's the fear of the officers themselves. What will this change mean for their identity? What will it mean for their careers, for their paychecks, for their benefits? They need reassurance for all of those things. But it's also about what does this mean to their identity? They've built a certain identity. And a change of this size really threatens that. And many of them are struggling with that right now. And then there's fear on the community side. You know, as Dr. Bradwell said, you know, this fear of crime and fear of the other and fear of what might happen if we establish this new structure is an extremely powerful force. I've never received more emails, and this is saying something because if you all live here in Ithaca, you know how politically engaged, civically engaged our community is. I've never received more emails, more phone calls than we have in the last month. We've been flooded with people all over the country, parents of Cornell students and Ithaca College students saying, how could you do this? What are you thinking? And overcoming that fear on both sides and building a bridge towards a better future is our main challenge right now.
So I have a question for you, and I want to push back a little bit on the notion that both sides are suffering, because if you're a young person and you've been experiencing some of these things historically, anybody could be experiencing these in the larger community. When people say this is just a rebranding, how do you explain that? Because what you're talking about is sort of still a hierarchical structure of some sort that doesn't really talk about unarmed response or building, you know, I speak a little bit more about that, because what we hear a lot is, where's the investment in community? If you're rebrand, is this a rebrand? Is it not? I would love to just have young people hear a little bit more about that, and they probably can articulate a little bit better than I can, but I want to shift it a little bit there to have some clarity. And then I know that Dr. Belisa and Richard also have their hand raised.
Sure. So it is a rebrand, but it's not just a rebrand. It's a reset, right? The chance to have civilian leadership over the department, as well as that unarmed community response, paired with the other 18 parts of the recommendation, all of which call for increased investment in the kind of community building that prevents crime and increases feelings of public safety in the first place, is what we're attempting to build here. And why would it be important to change the name? Why is it important to change those things if you're going to change a culture? To answer that, you've got to drill down into what makes a culture in the first place. Right? A culture is a very complicated set of characteristics. It's a language. It's a set of values. What's funny inside of an organization? What's not funny? What are our shared ambitions? What's understood to be admirable? What's understood to be unacceptable? And when you are attempting to change a culture, that culture always, always, always fights back. And The largest way that pushback happens as you attempt to change any organization, but particularly in law enforcement, is that any one reform will go, well, why should we bother to change? Things are working the way they are. And this is always the way we've done things in blank, right? Maybe you've heard this from your teachers, from your parents, from your friends. This is always the way we've done things at Ithaca High School. At Cornell, this is always the way we've done things. Well, the chance to say, maybe that's the way we did things in the Ithaca Police Department, but this is not the Ithaca Police Department anymore. It's the Department of Public Safety and Community Solutions. And in that department, we promote people based on how well they engage positively with the community, by how many bonds they build. That is what we value, and that is who we will advance. That is a huge opportunity. And it does mean making investments in non-militarized and non-law enforcement public safety solutions, like those unarmed community solution workers.
All right, so I'm gonna go to Richard. I see your eyebrows raised a little bit. So talk to me.
I'm just reflecting that the mayor captured what is the meaning of what these changes are, right? And I was thinking about the question that was asked before, and I think it ties in. Any opposition that we hear to the plan, right? It revolves around property crimes, and loss of jobs, right? Which reveals a monumental degree of tone deafness in the opposition and the way people are opposing it. We are talking about the existential threat to Black and brown bodies. We're talking about something that affects the quality of life, the way we interact, the way we're perceived, the way we're treated, the way we're acted upon, just because of what W.E.B. Du Bois said was hair, skin, and bone, because of those differences, right? And we don't hear that. We know, and what it's doing is occluding what is really happening. The truth of the matter is that 19th century policing is no longer an acceptable way of doing business in the 21st century. It is not going to happen anymore. You know what I mean? What the mayor articulated was what we think is a realistic goal, and it's a living document that is that could change. But policing has to be demilitarized. I mean, you know, we speak about this idea of having the police being guardians of our community, caring for us, listening to us, working for us, instead of having warriors. What we have created is warriors that are the product of tough on crime philosophies from the 90s and 80s, where they were calling us beasts and super predators and animals and locking us up at incredible rates. I mean, I am a formerly incarcerated person. I could not go into a mess hall anywhere without being in a sea, I mean, literal sea of Black bodies. I mean, it was crazy, and it's still crazy. Look at the local jail. Consistently, 40 to 50% of the population is Black. We make up 6% of the population of Tompkins County. It is impossible for the other 96% of the population to not be committing crimes at equal to or the same rate. They're the nephews. They're the ones that are controlling all this crap. You know what I mean? Look at the shelter, overwhelmingly represented by Black and brown bodies. Look at a woman's domestic shelter, overwhelmingly represented by the Black body. We just took a sampling of landlords who are going to evict people. 270 landlords were sampled and asked if they plan on evicting people. 70% said, we're going to evict somebody. Somebody's getting kicked out as soon as this moratorium is over. And I'm willing to bet everything that it's going to be disproportionately Black and brown bodies, because they're the ones that are being fired. They're the ones that are losing their jobs because of COVID. They're the ones that are struggling. And so it is systemic and it is operational. And policing is one aspect of it, and it has to be reformed. Change is scary. I mean, believe me, it is a scary thing. No one wants to see it, but it's going to happen. There is a spirit of this time. There is an air that we're not having this anymore. People are speaking up, and this is a good recommendation. It should be supported, and any criticism is usually an expression of stupidity, because they're talking about property, they're talking about losing, and they're not going to lose their job. No one is going to lose. We're going to reinvest more money into the police department by creating another arm to it. Property, crime is not going to, there's not going to be uptick on crime, because the policing is not going to disappear for any given time. It's not going to be like they're going to stop the police today and it's going to take 5 months to reconstruct another police department. None of that is happening. This is the same fear that Trump was using about Black and brown bodies attacking and killing grandma on her bed. And this is the same racial fear. And it's a racial argument. And whoever listens to it, whether they know it or not, they're just reproducing and perpetuating a racist attitude, racist formations that have kept our population subjected for the longest.
Thank you for sharing that. And it made me think about something that Travis had flagged for me, and I wanted to sort of segue into this. And Savannah, I also see your hand because I want to have you speak as well. But Kyrie, you mentioned that you are studying to become a police officer, if I heard you correctly earlier. And I just want to talk to you about like, why are you here to talk about this recommendation and this report if you feel comfortable? And then talk about that experience, because right now, if you're sort of training to be in this space, I did hear that you had some personal experience and interactions with law enforcement, and then you're a young person here. And so if you felt comfortable, what brings you here and what do you hope to get out of this conversation, or you hope to illuminate for young people who are watching this conversation?
Well, first of all, I would like to say again, Mr. Rivera, that was pretty sweet. I like listening to that. Why am I here? Like I said before, first off, I'm here because Travis asked me to be. That's first and foremost. Number two, I'm also here because I think for me, wanting to be a police officer, I think this is a conversation that I personally need to engage myself in. It's very humbling to hear both sides of what's going on in terms of this whole policy and this plan right now. And to hear it from the mayor himself, that's something I appreciate a lot too. So that's why I'm here. And the whole like process with the whole police thing right now. Well, to be honest, I didn't want to be a police officer when I first got into school. I think I changed my mind, I think sophomore year, and then I started to take it more serious. Started doing ride-alongs, did an internship recently, and so I want to say I kind of got the best of both worlds with the whole, me being getting the short end of the stick and dealing with, bad cops and stuff like that. And the reason I say bad cops is because, like I said, I have the best of both worlds. And in my opinion, I don't think, I've met some great cops and I've met some bad cops. And I just really think that one reason why, what I told myself is why I want to be a police officer is because, it was at the time, like I said, I got the short end of the stick before, and I've dealt with a bunch of scenarios of, bad policing. And what I told myself was maybe if a guy like me walked up to a kid like me, or a kid the same, or someone the same color as me walked up to me, I feel way more comfortable. And based off of what Mr. Rivera was just saying, that led me to think in my head, and like I said before, I have the best of both worlds. The way I think about it is because, I did the internships and I've seen what they deal with, maybe not everything they deal with because, I'm not a cop yet, but, and like I said, in their eyes, I'm still another Black kid. So, what I was thinking to myself was, with this whole process, what was that one thing that was like, that told you guys, maybe we shouldn't train these officers to, better understand people, because as a police officer, in my opinion, I think, you shouldn't be a stranger to your community and the people that you police. And on top of that, you shouldn't not feel, your people shouldn't feel comfortable. The people that you're policing shouldn't feel uncomfortable around you. And so I just want to know, like, with me having the best of both worlds, what was that like? What was that whole process like with just saying, hey, we shouldn't train police officers to, better understand people, or maybe we should train police officers to deal with people in this kind of scenario or that kind of scenario, or maybe this police officer should take that class. I know right now, I'm trying to go to the police academy in Corning. and a bunch of requirements. I had to take a bunch of classes. I mean, I took them already, thank God. I'm an exercise science major. Like I said, I wasn't trying to be a police officer before. So thank God I took those classes already. But right now I'm in two psych classes, and I'm in two sociology classes. And, you know, right now and pretty much in those classes, we're just focusing on better understanding people and understanding how people work, and not just people in not just any kind of people. You know, we're talking about different races. We're talking about male, female, you know, and any kind of people. And so that's why I really don't understand. In my head, I'm trying to make it make sense. Is just when, you know, when do you say, hey, maybe that training isn't enough, or maybe that training wasn't enough? So that's just the way that I've been thinking about it. To young people, I don't know. And to young people, I would just say right now, I know I think you guys, as the older generation, I think you guys have given us more of an opportunity to speak out. I mean, as you can see, me and Marquand are here. But I would also say, with that being said, don't just because we have the opportunity to speak, don't ignore the idea of listening. That's probably just the advice I give to young people.
Well, with that, I wanted to sort of give you some responses to have you get some insight around the different, like recommendation 2, recommendation 3, recommendation 9 and 15 were sort of touching on, you know, some of the different training aspects or alternatives. And if I'm understanding your question correctly, I think maybe asking Mayor Myrick and County Administrator Molino, like, why is training only one part of this? And what is it about the policing system that makes it such that only, you know, training reform doesn't work? And so when Kyrie's talking about all of this piece of training, why is it only this part, or why is it that this is the part that we're focused on so much?
Sure, I can start a little bit. First of all, Curry, if you're asking what you can be doing, and you're talking about, you know, learning how to treat people, how to deal with people, how to meet people where they are, I think you're leaps and bounds ahead of most folks looking to get in this career field, because I think that's what we're looking for when we talk about a culture change. We're talking about how to ensure we're treating people humanely, and I think if that's what you're talking about, what you're doing right now, I think you're well on your way to learning and to growing as the type of individual that we want to see get into this public safety realm moving forward. So my hat's off to you to taking that initiative on yourself. I think that's a great start to things. You know, training is important, and we talk about in the recommendations of redesigning training and ensuring that there's culturally responsive training, de-escalation training, a mental health component to the training, ensuring that our officers are well versed, or our public safety employees are well versed in those areas, and we think that's important. I think it speaks on two things. Number one, training has to be continual. It can't be a one-off thing. It needs to be continued through an officer or an employee's career as they go through things. I also think we need to look at those attributes and those individuals when we look to hire candidates. How do they view individuals? How are they going to treat people? And I think that's going to be an important piece of when we talk about hiring. What are the types of individuals we're hiring, and are we hiring folks that look at people as individuals, and how are they going to treat individuals in a humane way? So I think that's an important piece to it. Training continues both, you know, while you're being trained as an officer. And one of the things that we've talked about, and one of the things many communities have said, is the state of New York needs to change its expectations when you go to the police academy. We talk, you know, they need to change how they're training folks, and really talking about what I think Richard was speaking of, is how policing needs to change moving forward into the next century. So training is an important piece to it. I don't know that it's, you know, it's important, but it's not going to matter if it doesn't effectuate change in the way people behave, and the way our officers and our public safety folks behave. And that said, that filters into some of the other recommendations. For example, it's been brought up before, the mental health recommendations, or investing in an alternative response, an unarmed response. And I think there's many facets to this. You the unarmed response or an alternative response, particularly around crisis intervention, is I think the mayor mentioned it earlier, that folks that may be having a crisis moment or a mental health crisis, the sight of a uniformed officer with a gun creates trauma, may escalate a situation. An alternative response model is providing the better response for the circumstance. And that may be a mental health professional, maybe a social worker, or maybe someone who has a different skill set that may not induce that trauma or trigger any response differently than what a uniformed officer may have. So that's part of what that alternative response model is. And that's part of what that investment is, because we don't necessarily have that type of alternative response on the size or the scale that we want to incorporate it in. And many times it may be a co-response where this is the primary, but there's also a secondary law enforcement response for safety reasons. That is a model that exists in other communities throughout the country. And I think it's a model that we heard loud and clear from folks that they want to see incorporated into our community. I say all that, but if the system that it's put into doesn't put people first, doesn't put humane treatment of individuals first, doesn't look at it through an equity lens, then we're going to get the same results at the end of the day. So when we named this the Reimagining Public Safety Initiative, it wasn't just about law enforcement. It was about all of the health, human, and social services that support individuals in our system that need to also go through culture revision and culture change, and similar to what the mayor talked about and how the change in IPD to a public safety unit needs to happen in order for folks to be treated fairly, to be treated humanely. So that's a little bit of background both on the training and the alternative response model. And it's the first step, I think, as I've said before. This is one step to a longer stairwell when we start to look at all of our services that support and interact with each other, well beyond just law enforcement.
Yeah, and I'll just add that I agree that the training is a necessary part of it, Kyrie. So we should and we will pursue the most advanced training possible. But training, just like all the other pieces of the plan, are necessary, but not sufficient. And if we only do that, we won't be doing enough. We've got to take a comprehensive view of this, which means doing better recruitment, finding the right people, training them appropriately, having the right incentives for advancement in their careers, and then just matching up the actual personnel with the needs on the ground.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And thank you for that. In the spirit of time and in the spirit of being young people centered, what's the term that you all want to be using? I want to be able to open the floor. I know Savannah had her hand raised for a really long time. Ms. Harmony, we haven't heard from you if you want to speak, and Marquand. So I want to open the floor so you all can ask the tough questions. And then I'll touch a little bit on specific recommendations that I haven't heard a little bit of meat for to push back a little bit. But other than that, I'm going to open the floor now to Savannah, Marquand, Ms. Harmony. The floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. I just want to say thank you for allowing me to speak and allowing me to take up some time. For me, my main question is, if this plan does go through, will there be any kind of precautions being taken or any plans being taken for any backlash? Because already we've had so many backlash on social media, or even the protests that have been happening on the Commons. It resolved in, a flag being burned, people getting in people's faces. And, if it sadly happens to get physical, will there be any plans to protect the safety of the community, especially those who are against what we're doing?
I think I'll step in. I think it's a great question, Savannah. And I think the leaders of this community, the people that are going to be making the decision, have to continue to keep the dialogue in the right direction and continue to, the mayor, myself, the Common Council, the county legislature, the other leaders in the community need to continue to keep this focused and this conversation focused on where we need to go, and both in the short term and long term. And I think that's the best precaution to take, is to understand that this is a longer path, and the dialogue can't filter off. This plan is adopted. This is not a plan per se that sits on a shelf. This is an initiative. This is a culture change that needs to continually be focused on, both weeks, months, years, as we move forward. So it needs to shift the focus our focus needs to continue to stay on this initiative as we move forward. This culture shift isn't a one and done initiative, and the leaders of our community have to continue to keep it on the forefront in order to temper those that want to oppose it. That's my personal perspective. The leaders of our community have to have the conviction to continue to stay in front of this after the decision is made.
Yeah, I agree. And Savannah, I think you stressed something which is true, which is that we have to keep us safe. That this is all of our jobs, and a part of keeping us safe is exactly what we're doing right now, talking about these ideas, exchanging suggestions, and then going out there and holding this community together. Because in truth, there is danger no matter the course we take. If we do nothing, if we don't change our public safety departments, there is enormous danger in that. And the uprisings from last year, the protests and counter protests and rallies and counter rallies, that's all taking place under the existing system. So too is every incident of crime that happens. And there is danger from changing course too, from establishing a new direction. But there is opportunity. There is a real opportunity from a new direction to alleviate those dangers, to look out for each other, to protect each other. And as Richard said so well, institute a new form of public safety in a gradual, even cautious manner that doesn't leave us with huge gaps of protection, but instead transitions justly to a better form of public safety delivery.
Thank you so much. Savannah, thank you for your question. I hope that you got some of the answers you were looking for. Marquand, you've been in your suit, and I've heard from you in the beginning, but I want to be able to give you the space. So you have the floor if you have questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And after hearing what has been said, I see that there's a lot of focus, or there has been a lot of focus on quote unquote targeted focus groups. So my question for you guys is, in appropriate to the Public Safety Review Board, who will be serving on this board, and what will be implemented to ensure that the targeted focus groups can hold the various agencies involved in this process accountable?
Yeah, the proposal. So the proposal on the city side is to take the existing community police board, which is civilians, members of the public, selected by the mayor and confirmed by the Common Council. We want to give them extra powers. So first, extra support, additional funding so that they can hire as they need, investigators so that they can do more thorough investigations, have better, more professional deliberations. But we also want to give them extra legal authority, namely subpoena power, the power to compel the public safety department to comply with internal investigations. We think that kind of civilian oversight will be very important.
So as a follow-up, when you say civilian, who specifically? Because I remember in the when the focus group was mentioned, there was questions. Well, there was mentionings of college students, a member of the LGBTQIA community, the Black community, the Ithaca College community. So how are there anything being done to incorporate those individuals?
Yeah, that's a really good, Marquand. That's a really good question. The existing board is diverse, in part. Well, I think the point you raise is a good one, which is that as we design this new system, we should institute into the design requirements that of representation, because we cannot just rely on the fact, it is my goal to be mayor for the next 50 years, to do at least 11 more terms. But if that, and in the time I've been mayor, making sure that particularly Black and brown people are overrepresented on the community police board has been a priority for me. But you're right that we can't just rely on that being the case no matter who the mayor is. So I think it is smart to design that into the new community police board.
Marquand, can I follow up? I have no, I didn't write the recommendations, right? And so I'm not a part of any of the committee or city government agencies. But that question that you asked is deep. And I want to go back and say, Savannah, question you asked is one of the best questions I've heard about how are we going to prepare for backlash. And I greatly appreciate that. What I do know as someone who studies policy is words on paper, right? So the words don't match deeds. And so what we have to do first is make sure that we can get our elected officials to vote on a plan that creates space for us to then actually do the real work. And so that question that you asked for me is about the next step is the real work. And we're going to be looking for the brilliant minds that we have in our community to help us make this into some reality. Partnerships, community building, relationships, all of that will be essential. But that question right there for me is about how do we turn something from a piece of paper into actual lived experiences. So I thank you greatly for that question.
So I want to just add on to that, Dr. Bradwell. Then how are young people, do you foresee, and this is maybe not a question directly for you, but for the entire group, then how do you foresee young people continuing to be a part of this process? You know, we're not at the point, we're at the feedback loop point where it's consistent feedback, come, give some more. People tired of giving. When are we going to be doing? How are we going to be doing? Who's going to be doing? Those are all big questions, right? But where do young people fit into any of that? And we may not have the answers, but I do think there are a lot of smart folks who've been involved in this that can talk about it on this virtual reality that we got going on. Yeah,
I would
do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I do want to jump in. Hello, beautiful people again. So in thinking about that question, first of all, I want to say thank you to Savannah. I know that she's logged off, but I appreciate that anytime Travis or I call on her, she immediately is ready to serve. And that is a beautiful thing to witness, and also beautiful to know that she is passionate and that she inspires others to be passionate about being a part of these conversations, because these conversations are necessary and they are intentional. And so for me, I think that the way that you keep youth engaged is by leaning on the leaders. But how much do you lean on leaders to carry the weight? Because as a leader and as one who's been a leader for a long time, starting back in high school and being in the community and speaking and voicing concerns for as a young individual and for my community, my youth group, it was a lot, and it can be a lot, and it still continues to be a lot. So you're asking for us to continue to show up. You're asking us to continue to do the work, and it's hard, right, to do that and then not see positive results or any movement at all. And so for me, I think I struggle in answering this question for two reasons, because I am the one doing the work, but also because I see the need and I greatly desire to get to the other side, right? So for me, I think that it's a matter of making sure that our young people, so you take Travis, you take the Miss Harmonies, you take the Dr. Nias, you take the Mama Shelleys, and you take like all of these individuals who are leaders, and then you grab the Savannahs and you grab the Kyries and you grab, the young individuals who are willing to sit and listen and be a part of the conversation, but then you actually listen. And then put it into action. And so I think that relying on them to continue the conversation and then to recruit essentially more young voices is important. And I also had that same question about how do you continue to keep young people engaged and feel like their voice is being heard, because it's difficult. It's a lot. We're asking a lot. And also it's difficult because we currently don't see a Kyrie, and on the police department. And how do we know that we can trust this process? There's so much pushback. And so I think that this is a lot to tackle. And I definitely honor everyone and for their time and for being invested. But even me as a leader, I still question how successful this process will be. Even as much as I believe in it, I still question if we're going to get to the other side of this and if it will happen. So I just wanted to share those thoughts.
Thank you so much. So anybody have anything to say towards what Ms. Harmony just said?
I said one. Oh, sorry, Richard. You want to go ahead?
Go ahead. I'll follow you.
All right, Richard. I just wanted to piggyback off of two things. What Dr. Bradwell mentioned, and I think it's what Harmony is getting at, is what is, adopting policy is something, it's words on a paper, but action in implementing that action that shows results, but also investment. I mean, we're talking about money, we're talking about funding. Putting behind initiatives brings change or shows investment and shows intent. I think that's an important piece of this discussion. We talk about investing in community solutions. What are we willing to invest, and how are we going to invest? And that, that turn from my perspective, that is able to put these recommendations into place. And until we get that monetary investment, whether it's through the legislature, through the Common Council, that to me is showing commitment to what they're also doing and what they're saying they're going to do from a policy perspective. And I think that is an important piece of the follow through from what Dr. Bradwell was saying. Policy is important, but in order to effectuate that policy, that investment needs to be made. Whether it's community initiatives, whether it's alternative response, whatever that is, the monetary, the funding, and the continual funding of it, I think is an important piece to the puzzle. And has to be, and I think that's how the change becomes effectuated. So I just wanted to add that to one of turning policy into action, I think, has to also be followed with that monetary commitment. That's all I had. I'm sorry.
All right, so Richard, you wanted to follow up? Thank you, Jason.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I think Marquand's questions have been very insightful and very, very, very important. We haven't thought about some of these things, right? That's what's so magical about this situation here. I'm asking the young folks, if I was to ask anything, not to accept any of this on faith, right? You have to hold us accountable. You just can't, this is going to happen and this is going to change our world, our future. You have to keep engaged. I mean, one thing I've learned is that human beings will surprise you all the time. Whether they disappoint you or they make you a better person, they're always going to surprise you. And I'm hoping that in this young population, we find the next leaders, the next Avantes, the next legislators, the next speakers. And that's what I hope. I hope you don't take this on faith. Do not become religious over this recommendation. This is a living document. What we mean by that is that it has to fit our future, fit your future. I mean, we cannot predict what's going to happen in the future, but we know that we cannot continue to have the sorts of murders that have been happening in the past. So it's up to you to just keep pushing it forward, keep pushing the agenda, keep putting new ideas, keep asking the questions. Like the question that you asked, nobody has asked it yet. How are we going to make sure this keeps going? How are we going to make sure that the administration, how are we going to make sure? We thought that we just leave it into the government's hand and they were going to fix it. No, it's not going to happen like that. So I ask you not to take this on faith alone and just keep pushing forward.
May I have it's kind of like a follow-up. So thank you for that perspective, Mr. Richard. And it's like, I feel that from what I've seen personally, like from Savannah, she being a prime example of students who have used their voices for years. We have long used our voices. We have long fought for what we believe in, but from our perspective, we feel as if the government isn't listening. So I was wondering specifically, are there any things that could be done that could put us in a position where we are granted that oversight over decisions like this? We don't necessarily have to we're obviously not as qualified to make decisions, but to have those discussions, to be able to call a little bit of shots, to have that oversight. That's what we want. We're tired of protesting. We're tired of that. We want to be able to make decisions. I'm personally tired of feeling powerless. And I was wondering what could be implemented to assist in those efforts.
So one thing before somebody jumps in, you're never not qualified. Your lived experiences qualifies you to stand up and do this work. So I don't want to hear that you're not qualified. Maybe you don't meet the, formalities of age or the formalities of this or that, but the fact that you are here in your suit doing this work makes you qualified to speak about these issues. So take that from your vocabulary. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to the folks who are in these positions at this point because they meet the current qualifications. So Mayor Myrick, County Administrator Molino, jump in here and talk about that.
So I'm not either one of those people, but I'm going to jump in.
Oh, I didn't see you. Oh my goodness. Sorry. I would have went to you. I didn't see you.
Oh no, I didn't have my hand up.
Okay.
I didn't have my hand up, but people have been jumping in, so I'm just going to jump in.
Jump in. I like it.
And part of the problem, having sat on just a ton of these meetings that I normally don't sit in on, is that all of these things are governed by bureaucracies. And Robert's Rules of Order and seconding and someone, can I get another one? And did we have an amendment and this, and it's mind numbing. And all I can think in these meetings is like, this is why nothing ever changes, right? So it's not surprising to me to hear, right, and to experience myself, right, that, the sort of incremental change is not, first of all, it's not flashy, right? And we actually really, we don't pay a whole lot of attention to the strides that we make, right? Because they are bureaucratic, because they are policy driven, right? And we pay much more attention to, first of all, we don't celebrate our victories nearly enough. But so for example, if this gets passed, we need to celebrate, right? Like we need to do something, right? We need to celebrate the work that it took and the hours and the reputations that people put on the line. Like we need to give literal thanks for that and honor that, right? So we don't do that kind of stuff. But the other thing is that if you're not around long enough, right? So if folks who circle in and we are a very transient community, and not just because of the college students, but when I first got here, people would ask me what kind of job I had or what kind of line I had at Ithaca College, because they want, and I figured out later, it's because they wanted to know, are you sticking around or are you leaving, right? And so when you have a constant influx of folks, first of all, that's great for new ideas and keeping you young and that kind of stuff. But then it's really hard to measure the change. And so I think there's sort of a healthy balance of being able to, to recognize and celebrate and point out where we have moved the needle a little bit, and also why it's so freaking difficult to move that needle. Right. And I had one of the women I learned the most for, Annie Thomas, organizer in Atlanta, tell me, I don't know Robert, and I do not care about his rules of order. And that's all I kept thinking when I'm sitting in these meetings, right? But we need to recognize why it's so difficult and whether or not all of those sort of bureaucratic policies are necessary. Right? Like if the bureaucracies are meant to reproduce themselves, they are not meant to change. And that's a lot of the problem. And I think a lot of the frustration that people feel. And so, and I don't think they're all necessary. I think we, again, going back to what someone said, we do them because we've done them. Right. And so, right. So we need to be better about celebrating what actually changes. We need to rethink whether or not some of these quite honestly, white organizational culture, bureaucratic systems are necessary, and which ones are maybe actually impeding our work.
Yeah, I agree. And Marquand, let me just say, as somebody who I so deeply enjoy a committee meeting. I really do. And I've always been just since I was a child, just a strange kid who'd like watch C-SPAN. That there are lanes for folks that you might feel like, And I hear deeply your frustration saying we've protested, and if it didn't change, okay, what else can we do? So let me offer you a few other lanes that I've seen actually move the needle, particularly with elected officials. Protests are good. Protests are actually, in my view, best for organizing people for all the actions to follow. When you're out in the street, you get those phone numbers, you get those email addresses, you figure out who feels the same way you do, and you start to target folks through quiet conversations, right? Calling a city council member, inviting them to coffee, and then sharing your experience over coffee with them will often do more than 1,000 emails in their inbox to change their mind. Same thing with a phone call. The relationships are the currency through which political change happens. There is board and committee work. You know, one of the first things I did when I was on the city council was create the Ithaca Youth Council, which is good, but necessary again, but not sufficient. On every board and committee in the city and the county, if you're over 18, you can serve. So whether it's the planning board or the community police board, which by the way, we did create a youth liaison position, 2 youth liaison positions specifically for that community police board. But I also just want to say, finally, Mark Juan, I ran for office when I was 20 years old, and I was still am less well dressed than you, but also was and am less well spoken, less well composed than you are. So, and I won, because I think what you'll find is that voters are more interested in fresh energy and new ideas than elected officials are. And so I would encourage every one of those lanes, doing specific targeted relational outreach to elected officials who have power, joining boards and committees so that you can influence what happens inside City Hall or the county government or the school board, and then running for office yourself. I was about to say it's fun. It is worth it. Let me say that instead. It is worth it.
I'll add to this. Being a county administrator is much more fun than a mayor. So if you want to really get into, you want to have fun, you can come. We'll get you lined up. I always appreciate it when Dr. Gonzalez spells things out, particularly when she makes fun of my career and the line of work I'm in. I don't get educated by Dr. Gonzalez. I get schooled by her, and I always appreciate it. I think my personal opinion, everything the mayor said is true. I think the relationship piece is critically important. For me as an administrator, when I get a call from a constituent, I always try to call them back as quickly as I can. Those are the most powerful opportunities for me to understand from folks how decisions we make impact them. And from my perspective, I have a two-way street. I help influence policy, meaning I provide suggestions, recommendations, direction to those policy setters, and they rely on me as a professional and my staff to say, what's the best direction to go in and why? And then when they make that decision, I also have the ability to influence how it's implemented. So when I have a direct communication with a constituent and a member of the public, that to me is the direct feedback of, how did this policy affect me, or how can it affect me, and how is it being implemented? And this is how it affects me, my family, my friends, and so on and so forth. So I say that because I think the relationship piece, the phone call, is a lot more than an email, and it takes time. The relationship piece takes time and energy, but to effectuate serious change, I would agree that the terminology the mayor uses, relationships are the currency, I think are incredibly valuable. I do not disagree with Dr. Gonzalez in that our systems, I don't know who Robert is, and I don't care about his rules either. I know I have to live them at least more times than I want to on a monthly basis. Nonetheless, we try to make it better as we can, and it's a process that will continually evolve forever. But I would say you want to influence, I think the key to that is going to be relationships. And that's, I think, true with anything and most things. I mean, 99% of what I do has to do with relationships with people versus the technical components and the brick and mortar stuff. So you're passionate about something, you've got groups of folks that are passionate about something, reach out, network, find the people that can move things. And I think that's how you make change happen.
And with that, I think we are way over time. I know we had a lot at 5:30. I know Belisa has to hop off to go to dinner. So I will let everyone go. But what I will say is that I thank you so much for taking the time. You are never too young to be involved in anything, and nothing changes if people don't step up. So thank you to all of the panelists And feel free to reach out to any of the folks on this call to get information and be involved. Thank you so much and have a good night, everybody.
Thank you, Dominique.